Today, super sick and all, I'm going to bring you the stories of three notorious cases in which parents took the law into their own hands and delivered a death sentence to those who preyed upon their children. The first case is Marianne Bachmeier. Marianne's story was the most spectacular case of vigilante justice in German history. As we discuss these cases, drop in the comments what you'd do if you were in the shoes of these various parents. We're also going to discuss the case of Gary Plauche of Louisiana, and we're going to discuss the case in 2012 of the unnamed Texas rancher. All three of these cases are cases in which parents were put in a position where they had to make these choices. Were they going to let the law deal with it? Or were they going to take it into their own hands? And they all chose to take it into their own hands. So, do you think that they did what was right? In the first case, Marianne Bachmeier, she was born to her mother and her father being a former SS officer. So you can imagine this man capable of committing all these atrocities against Jewish civilians and all the terrible things the SS soldiers did. He wasn't the warmest parent. In fact, he was cold, he was authoritarian, he ruled his house with an iron fist, he was an alcoholic, he abused his family. So Marianne's mother divorced him. She went on to remarry another man who also unfortunately turned out to be an abusive alcoholic and would abuse Marianne frequently, beating her, going way over the top. So Marianne, as you'd expect from a broken home, being treated this way, no real love and affection in her life, partied, got in trouble, was engaging in all those types of behaviors that a lot of kids do in their teen years when they've gone through these things. At age 16 in the 1960s in West Germany, Marianne falls pregnant, and this is very much frowned upon in that culture at that time period. So she's sent away by her parents to a home for unwed mothers to give birth. So in this home for unwed mothers, she gives birth to this baby and she puts it up for adoption. She obviously is not going to bring it home. And I don't know if that was even a choice for her, if it was one of those things where they forced the mom to go away as a teen mom, they forced the baby away from her, or if she did it willingly, knowing there's no way she wanted to take her baby back to this household that she lived in with no way to provide with this abusive man that might harm her child. So either way, she gave her child up for adoption. At age 18, she finds herself in a relationship with a man who's not much different from her abusive father's. Not any kind of man at all, really, because when Marianne's heavily pregnant, he throws her out on the side of the road after an argument. No real man who's worth his salt would ever throw his pregnant partner out on a road or abandon his pregnant partner in an unsafe situation in any way, shape, or form. Anyway, he tossed her out and she gets picked up by another man. Unfortunately for her, this man is also a monster and sexually assaults her. Not long after this assault, she gives birth to the second baby, which she also decides she's going to put up for adoption because she has this crazy life. She's surrounded by bad people. She has no way to take care of a kid, so she has no choice. She knows that this baby deserves better than what she's going to provide it. So she makes the ultimate motherly decision and gives that baby up for adoption. And despite her having no parental skills, she wasn't taught how to be a loving parent. She wasn't loved. She wasn't cherished. She wasn't treated the way a child should be treated. But she still had the foresight to know that her kids deserve better, and she gave her kids a better life. So I'm going to look at it that way, that here's this girl who's had nothing but pain in her life, who's never been really loved, making the best decisions for her kids. Marianne reaches the age of 22, and she's now doing a little better than she ever has in her life, yet her circumstances are not ideal. She's still looking for love in all the wrong places, going after men that are like her father, like her stepfather. And she's working at this pub. And the pub owner is this hippie guy. He's wealthy, but he has a bad side too. And he is having a relationship with Marianne, who's 22 years old and one of his employees. According to sources, he also was not above forcing himself on Marianne if Marianne said no. So he was just sort of taking advantage of the situation with this young hostess that he had that really needed the money and she really needed the job and would allow this sort of behavior. So another predator, really. This is the kind of girl who does get preyed upon. That's why you gotta be there for your daughters. So again, she falls pregnant, and she's pregnant by this man. And this time, rather than giving the baby up, he would like her to keep the baby, raise the baby. He promotes her to where she's completely running this one pub. She's going to be financially provided for and paid really well. She can bring her child, she can bring Anna to work every day because Anna's father owns all of this. Her mother's running all of this. So she can bring Anna to work with her. And so that is what Marianne proceeds to do. And so she ends up treating Anna more like her best little friend rather than a little child, like a tiny adult. By all accounts, by age 7, Anna could cook for herself, she could clean for herself, she could get herself up some days and go to school like she should. But she is hitting school age now and sleeping at the pub until all hours of the night, and Marianne being passed out in the morning when it's time to get her ready for school because she's just wrapped up her whole night and is going to sleep in the early hours. This is leading to poor attendance for Anna and a series of problems for Anna at school. So Marianne at this point is talking to one of her friends who's a doctor and his wife about the possibility of maybe sending Anna to live with them so that Anna can have a more normal routine and childhood and attend school regularly, because Marianne knows, even though it will kill her to send Anna away and have to give up another child, that she's just not living a lifestyle that's very good for Anna, and she knows it, and she's worried. So she's starting to think about this, but before she can, tragedy struck. You see, her and Anna got in a fight one morning. And in Germany, kids walk to school. It is not uncommon for little kids still to this day in certain countries. It's just cultural. It's what people do in certain countries. And back in the day in Germany, there was no difference. Little Anna was supposed to take herself to school. So Anna leaves the house after this fight with her mom in the morning. And she decides she's going to skip school. She's not going to go. She is just going to walk around all day long. And so she does. And she starts walking around. Unfortunately, there's a predator in the neighborhood. A 35-year-old butcher, who we'll just refer to as cowardly scum and pig and various fitting terms. So this scumbag has been grooming Anna. He's been inviting her up to his place to play. He always kept all these little cats and kittens around and offered to let the little kids play with the cats and kittens. And he's the neighborhood butcher. So, of course, they've seen him with their mommies and daddies. They trust him. They'll go play with his cats. And he'd been grooming Anna in this way for a while. You see, 4 years prior to this, he wasn't the friendly neighborhood butcher. He was an inmate in a psychiatric hospital, locked away because he had so cowardly violated 2 little girls in such foul ways that they put him in a psych ward for it. They said, "Your brain must be very sick to do the acts that you've done," and they locked him away. Well, they let him have an opportunity to secure his release. If he would only submit to a voluntary chemical castration, they would set him free from that psych ward. And that's what he did. He did the voluntary chemical castration and he was set free. He built this new life for himself, the people around having no idea that this man, this local butcher, had just previously been locked up in the psychiatric hospitals before the days of your sex offender registry. So the parents didn't know. Neither did Anna. And a few weeks before that, he had gone to a judge because he was engaged now and he was going to be married, and he requested permission to reverse the chemical castration with hormone therapy, and his request had been granted. So now he's fully functional again. And he's got prey. Prey that has just told him that no one knows where she is, that no one will expect her for hours. And now is his time. And so he invites her up. He proceeds to spend the entirety of the day attacking this little girl. But little Anna, she's not one to be threatened to silence. A lot of predators threaten little kids to silence. Little kids don't say anything, or they're able to come up with something, but Anna was too smart for that. She had been raised in the nightlife. She had been raised by Marianne, and Marianne knew all the tricks that people used and had prepped little Anna. Little Anna knew, and she was threatening, "I'm going to tell my mama. I'm telling my mama, you're going to be in so much trouble." She had full confidence in her mommy. that her mommy would handle him all right. Yes, she would. Of course, to her, I'm sure her mother was invincible. She saw her tossing drunk men out on their bums out of the pub and everything else. I'm sure she really thought her mama was this vicious lioness. She turned out to definitely be so. She had full confidence. But that confidence in her mama is why this man claims that he took a pair of his fiance's tights and silenced that little girl forever. Because he knew Anna would indeed tell, and that if she told, he would go to jail. Because he didn't want to go to jail, he silenced her. And once he had done that, cowardly, disgusting, atrocious vileness, he tied up her little body and put it in a box and tossed her onto the muddy banks of the canal, returning later to bury her. Somehow, some way, I don't know how, his fiancée suspected or knew what he had done somehow. She figured it out, and she told the police, and he was arrested. On the third day of his trial, as the trial went on, Marianne stood up in the courtroom and took several steps, aligning herself right behind the defendant's table. She pulled a Beretta out of her handbag, pointed at his back, and fired 7 rounds, 1 round for every year of Anna's life. 6 of the rounds striking him in the back, almost all 6 fatal shots in and of themselves, calling him a pig as he fell. She then said in the courtroom that she wanted to shoot him in the face, but unfortunately, she only shot him in the back, and she hopes that he's dead. She wants him to die. So Marianne goes on trial now for manslaughter and the illegal possession of a firearm. And she tells them that that day in that courtroom, she'd known what he was about to say about her baby. You see, he had been spreading the most vile lies on Anna. He said that Anna showed up at his house that day and tried to seduce him. He said that when he didn't fall for it, that she tried to extort him with the threat that she would falsely accuse him of having done those things to her, those indecent, foul things. And so he was scared that she was going to have him put in jail on false accusations. And so that's why he took her life. And Marianne could not bear to have her baby girl slandered in court that way. And she said as the day wore on, she was haunted that day in that courtroom by visions of Anna, wondering, what are you going to do, Mom? Are you going to let him do it? Are you going to let him say these things? What are you going to do? She was haunted seeing her little girl appearing throughout the courtroom. And then all of a sudden, like in a dream, as if she was enchanted or entranced, she took those steps across and pulled out that gun and put those rounds into him, claiming she had no intention of doing that, that she only had the gun with herself for self-protection because the trial had drawn so much attention. And so she was ultimately found guilty of manslaughter and illegal possession of a firearm and sentenced to 6 years in prison. She served 3 years in prison and was released on parole. Marianne died at age 46 of pancreatic cancer and was buried next to her daughter. Her friends, after her death, came forward and said, that whole bit about being haunted by Anna was just a bit. That for weeks and weeks and weeks, Marianne every day had practiced that shooting in the basement of the pub, that she rehearsed it over and over and over and over until she got super efficient at retrieving the handgun from the location where she was going to have it, pulling it out, aiming it, putting the shots in, and that she just practiced that intensely for weeks and weeks and weeks prior to performing that in court. So there is some debate whether or not she was haunted. I think she just used that in trial, but she had behind the scenes, she had practice. It was definitely premeditated. She intentionally snuck the gun past all the security and everybody, and she was proficient. She knew exactly what she was going to do. She had it down to a T. She had practiced it over and over. But she was a haunted mother, regardless of whether she really was haunted or not. She was definitely haunted. Even when she was on her trial and a psychiatrist said, let me get a handwriting sample in court, her handwriting sample said, I did it for you, Anna, and had 7 little hearts. for every year of Anna's life drawn on it. What are your thoughts on the case of Marianne? Do you think her punishment was too light, too heavy? What would you do if you were in Marianne's shoes? Let me know. Now, moving on from Marianne to the case of Gary Plauche. Gary Plauche was a decent family man that lived in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was known to rescue stray animals and was described as a pure and kind soul, quick with a joke, loving, not a mean bone in his body, just a hardworking family man who had a reputation, though, for telling people that if anyone was to ever hurt one of his children, he would kill that person. And people believed it. They had no doubt. They had no doubt whatsoever, and neither did his son, Jody. And that's why his son, Jody, didn't tell his family what was happening. See, for the past year, his karate instructor groomed and then began to vilely assault little Jody at karate practice. At first, it started with him offering to drive Jody around in his car and testing the limits. This progressed to during karate practices, the karate instructor would send the other kids away with money to go down the street to 7-Eleven, but would tell Jody that he needed to keep him behind to do some special work with him. And the special work was horrible. Jody stopped wanting to go to karate practice. But his karate instructor would show up at his house and say, "Come on, man, you have to go. It's good for his self-discipline. It's good for him." And his mother would say, "You got to go, Jody. You got to go. We're paying for your lessons. You got to go to karate practice. You can't skip it and be lazy." But it all came to light in March of 1984 when his karate instructor kidnapped him. He kidnapped the boy and spent 10 days taking him across the country, hotel and motel, committing disgusting acts upon this child the whole time. They made it all the way to Anaheim, California. And in Anaheim, California, Jody made a collect call to his parents. The police were able to trace that collect call to a hotel, and the authorities were able to rescue young Jody and take his abductor into custody. While in custody, he confessed to not only all the acts he had perpetrated against Jody, but he confessed to having perpetrated vile acts against many children. This perpetrator was only 25 years old, and he had already destroyed so many lives of so many children. So they're extraditing this foul predator from California back to Louisiana, and they land at the airport and they're perp walking him. The detectives are perp walking him through the airport. Media has cameras filming, and as the cameras are filming and the detectives are perp walking this handcuffed guy through the airport, Gary is at the bank of payphones on the phone with his best friend, and he said, "He's coming. You're going to hear a shot." And as soon as they got that man behind him, he yanked out his pistol, he spun around, put it 3 feet from that predator's head, and he pulled the trigger one time. A single shot rang out, and the predator fell. The cops grabbed him and were screaming, "Why, Gary? Why? Why?" They knew he just doomed himself. He had just committed murder on national television in front of a live audience, in front of the police themselves. And so Gary was put on trial for the murder. Gary was not going to go through a whole trial about it. He fully admitted it. It was me. I did it in front of the camera, in front of the police. I'm guilty. No contest. So the judge said, "Well, why don't we do this? I'll sentence you to 7 years in prison, but we'll suspend the sentence. You don't have to spend any time in prison. You'll get 5 years probation, and you're going to have to do several hundred hours of community service." So other than pre-trial jail time, Gary did not spend any time in prison for this, and he performed his community service by mowing the grass at his church, where he attended. Gary continued to work, live his life, raise his family, and in interviews later in life, when he was asked about would he do it again, did he have regrets, he would say, "I have no regrets, and I would do it again. I would have no regrets to do it again either. I would do it as many times as I had to." Do you think that you would do what Gary did? Do you think that you would let justice run its course? If you were the judge, would you have sentenced him at all? What would you have done? Drop it in the comments and let me know. And this takes us to our final case. Now, the final case out of all the parents, this is the only parent who acted in the moment. who had no premeditation and had only his bare hands. You see, this was a young man, a young father. He was 24 years old. He had a 5-year-old little girl, and he had a ranch in a rural town called Shiner, Texas. He has never been publicly identified to protect the identity of his 5-year-old daughter, who is the victim of a heinous act. One day, her father is working on his ranch, and a witness comes running up to him. And this witness tells him that he has just seen one of the ranch hands carrying his 5-year-old daughter off to a secluded area by force. Forcibly, she was kicking, screaming. You could tell she did not want to be with this man she didn't know. I think the witness is probably a sibling, another younger child, because they're only ever referred to as the witness. And from the fact that the witness saw this and ran and got the father, I'm assuming this is not some grown, able bodied man who would have probably intervened immediately at that point. I'm assuming that this is either mama who sees this and runs and gets her husband, or this is a child. So whether it was mama or it was a child, a witness who saw this man forcibly carrying this little girl away, kicking and screaming, runs and gets dad. So dad drops everything and takes off running in that direction. And he starts hearing the agonized screams of his 5-year-old daughter. And as a parent, you know your child's painful screams. And that's what he was hearing. He was hearing his daughter's agonized screams. And so he runs following these screams, just as you can imagine, what he must have been feeling as a parent in that moment. And he rounds the barn, and what he sees that man doing to his daughter. This predator was violating her innocence, and her father flew at him, landing blow after blow to this predator's head and neck area, trying to stop it. And he realizes this man is now unconscious and no longer a threat, and stops, comes to his senses, and stops swinging. And it's like, oh, I've got to call 911. This guy needs an ambulance. I think I think he might die. I think I've almost beat him to death. And so he calls 911. He said, I need an ambulance. I caught this man raping my daughter. I don't know what to do. And as he tried to direct the authorities to his rural location, he just, he was begging and pleading with them, come on, this guy's going to die on me. He's going to die. So this father, he was forced to do what he had to do in that moment, I think. So police come, the ambulance comes, and the man does not survive. And in Texas, according to District Attorney Heather McMinn, to quote Heather, under the law of the state of Texas, deadly force is authorized and justified in order to stop an aggravated sexual assault or a sexual assault. All evidence provided by the Sheriff's Department and the Texas Rangers indicated that's what was occurring when the victim's father arrived on the scene. Therefore, the father was within the bounds of the law and never exceeded the boundaries of the law, and he was never arrested nor charged. And their identities are protected as their victims. What would you do if that was your 5-year-old? Would you fly into a frenzy? Is there any limit to what you would do in that moment to protect your child? I think mom or dad alike, virtually any parent would pounce barehanded in that moment just to stop it. So out of the 3 cases, I definitely feel the case of the 24-year-old Texas rancher was one that certainly he did what he had to do in that case. I, as a parent, probably would have done something very similar. Now, I may not have had the upper hand against a grown man, but I would have pounced him in that situation, that's for sure. I would have screamed at my child to run, and I would have done everything I could to keep that predator contained and focused here while my 5-year-old fled. I think that's what I would do. I don't know what I'd do in Marianne's shoes, and I don't know what I'd do in Gary's shoes. But I do think in the case of the last gentleman that he just was all instinct and just stopped the attack on his child, and I think he was well within his rights to stop it. So anybody who thinks about committing those crimes in Texas, just know in this state, deadly force is within the bounds of the law. So don't mess with Texas. And in the meantime, hold your babies tight. Always listen to your gut, for the horrors persist, but so do we. Thank you for stopping by. Thank you for tolerating my my stuffy voice um, and me not looking my best, fighting through this cold. So, guys, forgive me for my appearance today. I am committed to trying to bring you a video every single weekend. And so, you know what? On sick weeks, we're just going to do it and we'll just roll with it and get those stories told because it was true crime that saved me as a child from when I was almost abducted, which is a video for another time. Until next time, guys.